I don't have a kind of defeatist mentality about the future of the
It's
left
not
in
a,
this country.
oh gosh,
I
Osita.
don't. I
Why
don't.
is it that every time, why is it that every time that someone does the thing of trying to hold someone's feet to the fire, not just
Right.
say, oh, they should hold their feet? I'm actively trying to have a conversation about what it means for him to be empowered in the way we want him to be
Right.
empowered and to not bend the knee against all of the forces that are aligned against him and to
Right.
strategize around the defenses that he has against someone like Kathy Hochul. And
Right.
if I do that, suddenly it's I have a defeatist attitude. Do you know what I mean? Like this is part of the circularity that I think has driven so many people away from the
Right.
left, the traditional left,
Right.
and from the Democratic Party most certainly.
Right. Well, let me ask you. I mean, what do you think is most likely to happen in his first term of his
I think we're going to
leadership?
see a continuation
Right.
of the opposition that we're seeing right now. I
Right.
think we're going to have the continued fight. This is why I opened with the abundance thing. They are
Right.
not going to drop trying to come up with alternative
Of
branding
course not.
to Zohran Mamdani's popularity.
Right.
And one of the strategies they're going to employ is to make it so that he can't pass his policies because they're not
Of
going to
course.
fund his policies. And then they're
Right.
going to run with a narrative of, I told you this didn't work. They're
Right.
going to run more crime stories about New York than you've ever seen in your life,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, what is Zohran? Is the goal Zohran winning? Andre Easton put this really beautifully when he was on the show, the guy who's running against, one of the people who's running against Richie Torres. He says, paraphrasing, do you want a good guy in a bad position? Or do you want to create a world where it's a good position. It's a good party. It's a good environment. It's the broader structure that we're up against is fundamentally changed. And where I laud Zoran is for the choice to take positions and to have the eloquence and
Mm.
confidence to change the public's mind about how they think about Israel and how they characterize questions like, should Israel have a right to exist? Challenging the idea that a state just should have the right to exist as opposed to should it exist under certain conditions of
Mm.
equality. That to me is more of a value add than
Right.
him just sitting in Gracie Mansion. And if by sitting in Gracie Mansion, he has the platform to continue to shift the public's perception on things like that,
But
the
what
way
about
that I wish that
policy?
I'm sorry?
What are your expectations on
Well,
policy beyond
I
sitting
have
in
the
the mansion?
expectation that he might not be able to pass anything. That's my
Yeah.
point. My
Yeah.
whole point is that I think it's a little naive and premature. I don't mean it that way. I think that it is really short-sighted to overinvest in the idea that we got him in there, knowing that
Yeah.
there's a real possibility that he won't be able to do anything throughout no fault of his own once he's
Yeah, of
there.
course. Right.
And so I would rather be pushing and encouraging him to do the thing that he absolutely can do, which is to make it harder and harder for establishment Democrats to credibly argue that their way, the abundance way,
Right.
is the way forward. And even also
Right.
to make it clear that the Democratic Party institutionally is anathema to our views and to the existence of Zohran Mamdani. So much so that we need to take very seriously investing in third party alternatives. And as you talk about in your book, ranked choice voting, parliamentary systems,
Right.
other kinds of, you name some other kinds of voting and
Yeah.
walk through some other kind of voting schemes in the book as well that were very interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're going to see him continue to make the case for the ideas he believes in, obviously. Whether he uses his position to talk about forming a third party because things are so difficult for him, I don't know. Um, my
Well, I think
point
he
is that,
won't.
well, I think
I
I think
think
he
he
probably
won't.
won't, and I think the reason why he won't probably is because he just wanted the Democratic Party line, which should, I think, tell progressives something. Is that going to be
What should
true?
it tell? What should it tell
It
progressives?
should tell
If
them
he
that
wins
you
at
could
the,
win, and winning
and
is
then what?
important. Winning is
To what end?
to the ends that you just described, to making the case for the ideas that he believes in, right? To
Right. But he
continue
was
talking
making
about,
those
right,
cases before he won.
right,
And if
and now he's going
anything,
to do
he's
them
been making
as
those
the
cases
mayor.
less well since he's won the primary.
Now he's going to be the mayor, and people are actually going to listen to him.
Well, they were listening to him pretty well
No,
when he
they,
won the
I don't think
primary.
that most people in New York City, most people in this country, were not aware of Zohran Mamdani in January of this year. As mayor of New
No,
York City,
but
that's a different proposition, right? So if you care, if your priority is what you should be doing as a left-wing political figure is advancing our ideas, our doctrines, our values to as many people as possible. I submit to you that it's easier for you to do so if you've been elected in a major, very large city than someone who loses an election on a third party ballot line. Like I think,
Right, but why are we bringing up that hypothetical? He's won as a Democrat. If he
right.
wins as a Democrat saying that the cops aren't racist, the NYPD is not racist, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can, caucus with liberal Zionists or whatever the critiques, the most recent round of critiques of his campaigning are. The question that I'm putting to you is that worth the squeeze?
Yeah, I think so. Because in addition to talking, you are actually the executive of New York City, and you can do things. What he's going to be able to do, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how
Can you?
much he
Like,
lives in
come on,
executive.
Osita. We just established that there's a high likelihood he's not going to be able to do very much. And
We'll see. But this
I'm
is why
not,
you don't have to agree that it's defeatism. You don't have to agree with that word. But I'm in a kind of wait and see position. I think that people in positions of power in this country,
and I'm
even
not in a
on the
wait and see
left,
position. I disagree with that strongly. I think we should be preparing for battle. Do you think
we
Bill
should be.
Ackman and the corporate
But
elites are
preparing,
sitting around saying, let's just see if Zohran Mamdani is able to enact his
no,
agenda?
absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I also think preparing for battle doesn't mean preemptively saying, well, he's not going to be able to do anything. That's not battle.
Well,
That's already,
I have
that's surrendering already.
it's not surrendering. I don't know if you've noticed, Osita, I'm not the one who's mayor of New York. So me sitting on a
Right.
podcast anticipating that it's going to be hard for Zoran to
Nobody disagrees that it's going
fund
to be
his
hard.
agenda
Everyone
because
knows
Kathy
it's going to be
Hochul
hard.
said, I'm not going to fund your agenda. It's not me saying anything. It's just observing the reality of the world. So my question is, what I would desperately love to do is to get beyond that, right? To get to the next step, which
Right.
says, so then what can we get out of this?
Of
It's
course.
only defeatism because if you stay at this, if you don't let me get to the next bit, right?
Right.
Which is, okay, given we're up against this, it's not defeatism to acknowledge what we're up against. It's to say, then what do you do next? And what can you get out of this position? And if it seems to me, one of the most valuable things that Zoran's been able to accomplish is changing public opinion in the way that he's done, and that he has the potential to center new arguments the way that you've articulated in this book should
Right.
be centered. Arguments like, I mean, I don't know if you think that he should do this from his position as a mayor of New York.
Yeah.
Wasn't so much of it has to do with federal policy, but never mind. Could be popularizing some of this messaging about pro-democracy initiatives. Then I would like to be pushing him to do that, right?
Right.
I would like to be in a position where it's like, as the left, hey, these are the kinds of things that Zoran can be saying. And that's
Right.
constructive and good.
Well, I think that's
But-
right, and I think that there are things he could be saying about federal policy too. I mean, New York is a city that is deeply disadvantaged in a lot of the ways I talk about in the book
Yeah.
on democratic grounds. I think that there's room for him to say that, especially as it relates to Donald Trump's ability to abuse that city. So
Yeah.
I hope he speaks up about those things. But I think the heart of our dispute is this. Nobody really disagrees it's going to be hard. Nobody, I think, disagrees that there are many things that he has spoken about and promised that he's probably not going to be able to do. But we both recognize that there is an opportunity. I hope we both recognize that. And I think the heart of our dispute
An
is,
opportunity to,
well, to A, talk about the issues in the way you've described, number one. And number two, to actually enact some of his agenda and some things that people might come to him and say should be added to his agenda. We were going to see what he actually is able to accomplish as mayor. My point is, he's in a position to be able to do those things as a leftist who ran on a Democratic Party line instead of engaging in some kind of third party effort. And I think there are a lot of people on the left who are invested in the idea that becoming a Democrat, running as a Democrat, allowing yourself the party is inherently limiting in ways that veering and declaring yourself independent from the party and its structures would not be. And I think Mandani is
I disagree.
challenged that narrative.
I disagree.
I think he exists as a challenge to that general idea.
I don't think anybody who supports third parties thinks, oh, it's because it'll be easy. And I think that is a strawman argument.
You think more productive. You think it'll be more productive and less limiting
Yes.
because you're not being
Well, I
forwarded
don't think
by
it's less limiting.
the powers that be in the Democratic Party. You think you have more freedom to advocate for the things you want, to enact the
that's
policies that you want to do.
objectively true.
Right. So
It's objectively true that you could advocate more freely for the policies that you want. Whether or not you have the
sure.
platform to do so because you're boxed out of debates, et cetera, is a
Right.
different question.
That's a different question.
To be so clear, the argument is not that it is easy to grow third parties or do something in the alternative. It is that
It's
it
more
is
worthwhile.
necessary
Yeah.
is that it is
Yeah.
necessary because the Democratic Party quite obviously has limits on what it is willing to allow within its own structures, quite
Right.
obviously.
Right.
And that's not to say you can't use the Democratic Party institutions in certain ways, that you can't run as Democrat depending on your strategic
Right.
situation where you're running, that you can't do a dirty break strategy the way that so many people hoped Bernie Sanders would in 2020. I was Bernie Sanders' national campaign
Right.
secretary,
Right.
press secretary. I don't, I don't need to be told. I hope I don't need to prove my willingness to exploit a Democratic election cycle.
Right.
But that is not the same thing. I'm not. I sit here and I have candidates on every other week. I'm not the one poo-pooing the idea of using the Democratic Party or running on the Democratic Party line. But at any time third parties come up, I get a lot of arguments about how even saying the word third party is pointless and futile, and that's the defeatism that I observe in this space.
Right. Because they're not winning.
No?
Because they're not winning. And
Oh,
Zoran is.
well, I guess, 400 years of slave rebellions, they didn't win. So everything was pointless and all those people were losers.
Well, I don't think that the slave rebellion is quite the same as running on a different ballot line in a given election. Look, I think that
Sure.
you have different
That's the
people
nature of the
pursuing.
comparison.
Look, I think that there are different ways to try to achieve your ends as leftists in politics. There are people who've tried to work within the Democratic Party. There are people who tried to work outside of it. I do not think that that Zohran Mamdani, having pursued this particular route and facing the challenges he's going to face in his mayoralty, assuming he wins tomorrow, is necessarily a reason to believe he's not going to be at least partially successful in achieving some of the things that he
No, it's not a reason to
wants.
believe. I
Right.
believe strongly that he would be at
I
least
think that
partially
you,
successful.
so I don't know what there is to kind of raise doubts about here. I mean, I agree with you it's going to be hard. I agree with you it's going to be difficult. I agree with you that the forces of the Democratic Party are aligned with him, but I don't think I have as much you know, latent kind of skepticism that this might achieve something that you do. I don't know. I just
So
think we
you wrote
have to
a
wait and
whole
see.
book. You wrote a whole book about how there are all of these avenues to increase democracy,
Yeah.
filibuster reforms,
Yeah.
you know, gerrymandering reforms,
Yeah.
Supreme Court reforms that have been available to Democrats that they've chosen not to use, electoral college reforms. And so what is your theory of why they have not availed themselves of those possibilities and
Because nobody's asking them to.
what would
Nobody's
force
asking
them
them
to?
to, but a bunch of law professors nobody cares about. There's not, again, not a popular
Osita,
constituency for these ideas. And if you build a popular constituency around these ideas, politicians will then respond in some kind of way. If the only people who are asking for it are people like me or people who write, op-eds in the New York Times saying the filibuster is bad, nothing ever happens. If you have a mobilization of ordinary voters who vote in Democratic Party primaries and they demand these things from politicians, demand their commitments to them, you begin to change the scenario. So I don't know. I don't believe that the absence of democratic action on these things is cause to believe the Democratic Party could not be harnessed or forced to implement some of these reforms. And frankly, I don't know what would unless that happened in some way. I don't. Maybe you think that there's a third party route to getting some of them done,
Do
but
you
I
also
think that
think
the
that's why
easiest
we
way is
don't have a
probably.
wealth tax or Medicare for all because people haven't asked for them loudly enough?
Well, I think that the
Or is
last
there a
10
different
years or so.
mechanism there?
Well, I think in the last 10 years or so, we've seen a lot of mobilization around those ideas we didn't have in the 2090s. So we're closer to those things now today than we were before because of Bernie Sanders' campaigns and the campaigns of a lot of progressives. And maybe the next 10 to 15 years, we'll be in a position to implement them,
So to be clear, we are 1 year out from a presidential election. It's been
a
a
midterm
decade.
election.
No, we were 1 year past a presidential
Oh,
election.
yeah, sorry.
We had we've already had the better part of a decade of 88% or so of Democratic voters supporting Medicare for all, 50% of sorry, excuse me, 49% of Republican voters supporting Medicare for all and 66 or whatever it is of independents. So overwhelming majorities. Polls just don't get better than that for
Hmm.
policies. Similar numbers for something like tax from the rich.
Right.
And is it your belief that Joe Biden slash Kamala Harris didn't run in those policies during an affordability election cycle because they didn't know, or because people weren't complaining enough about healthcare costs or wealth distribution?
Oh no, I think that they didn't run on these things because they're interested in the Democratic Party that are opposed to action on those fronts. And they ran a
Mm-hmm.
different kind of campaign. And so if you were
Okay.
to mobilize more people in the next Democratic primary, next primary election, midterm elections, you would elect more Democrats who supported those things because Democratic primary voters focused on those ideas and policies over other ones. You might have a different set of people running for presidential elections and in Congress and in the Senate. If Bernie Sanders had instead of the proportion of the electorate he had in 2020 and 2016, majority of Democratic voters on his side, he might have been the nominee, he might be president today. He didn't have a majority of Democrats on his side. Yet people who are notionally supportive of Medicare for all and all these ideas, but they decided in that election that they prioritized beating Donald Trump. They didn't think that Bernie Sanders was the right candidate to do that, right? So
Why
if you
didn't they
had
think
a
that Bernie Sanders was the right candidate to beat Trump despite polls showing otherwise?
Well, for a lot of reasons. I think that they doubted that a socialist, a self-described socialist, could win a general election in this country. I don't think that they saw Bernie as a professional,
But why did they
competent
believe that?
politician.
Why did they believe that, especially when, as a socialist, polls were showing that he had the electability edge over his opponents against Donald Trump?
Well, I think there are a lot of reasons. I think it's self-presentation as a politician. Also, I think it's a combination of that and the media. So, you
Okay. And
know,
what was the media saying about Bernie Sanders at the time?
the media was saying he wasn't capable of defeating Donald Trump. I mean, these are things you can overcome, Briahna. I don't think that these are reasons
No,
you shouldn't believe that socialists can win, leftists can win elections. I think that we have
I
an
think
opportunity here to
it can be
do
overcome.
things differently.
I
How do you
believe
think?
that there's a world where Bernie could have won the
But you
election,
under, but
obviously.
you understand why this line of argument gets framed as a kind of defeatism, right? That Bernie Sanders was wronged in fundamental ways that could have obviated all the things he did in his campaign, and there are always going to be these kind of big powers that be over us, puppeteering the outcome and so on. And there's nothing we can do to change
No,
that.
did I say there's nothing we can do
Absent,
to change it? Do you want
what
to
do you
ask
think we
me
can
what you think
do?
I should do to change it?
I know what you think we should develop an independent media infrastructure we're not as reliant upon. Uh, so we're not as reliant upon the corporate media to shape the way that people think about politics. And I think that's a worthwhile goal. I think that's something we should do. My
I think
point
that's a nice
is,
thing, but that's not what I would have said. No.
what would you have
I
said?
would have said that you need to have a more adversarial relationship to the Democratic Party. I think there's a world where Bernie wins in 2020, certainly in 2016, if he's willing to wait a minute, if he's willing to call out what is happening for what it is. You cannot, I don't think that you cannot convince the public. They don't know who the enemy is as long as you're still trying to act like a friendly neighbor getting invited into the gates. There's a war that's happening that's being fought on a one-sided basis. So while the corporate media is telling a story that Bernie is a socialist that's going to cut off your head in Central Park if you vote for him, he's saying, Biden's a good guy. He would be a good president, sure.
Right.
He's
Because he
not a
was
lying
running,
liar and a senile, barely senile corporate freak.
right.
And he's not saying that we have, I mean, he said it somewhat. I don't mean to completely diminish. There was, some of this anti-corporate messaging, but there was not the ferocity of attack on the establishment that was necessary to help Americans understand that they should have an oppositional relationship to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was facing a real threat of mass defection because they were perceived to be so patently against their substantive economic interests.
Mhm.
When Zephyr Teachout writes a pretty banal article about corruption and how Joe Biden, as the senator from MBNA, is corrupted by all of these banking interests, Bernie Sanders throws her under the bus and says, no, he's not corrupt. That's a good guy. That's a candidate that can't win. And so regardless if you're running on a Democratic Party line, You need to be willing to articulate the contrast in a way that puts real pressure on the party to move left, or at least pretend to move left, or throw crumbs to the public. If you believe the Democratic Party should just be reformed, okay, then that's how you do it. But you don't do it by pretending that it's legitimate. And my concern with Zohran is that he, at first, was not willing to buy into the mainstream narratives, especially around Israel. And in fact, the population, the public responded positively to that.
Yeah.
It's proof positive of what I'm saying that he should do and stick the landing. But then, you read I said here in an article, and you see all of the corporate interests bragging that they have his ear and saying he's not really a socialist anyway. And that's how they're reporting it, right? I don't know if that's what he actually said. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt to a certain degree, right? I'm not trying to throw him away prematurely at all.
Right.
But there's a world where that article comes out and he clarifies his position that, of course, I'm a socialist and this is why you should be too. And I can say that because I'm winning, and I got to this winning position being loud and proud about who I am. Not saying, oh, actually, the NYPD isn't racist.
Right.
I apologize for saying as much.
Right. Well, the thing is, Zohran's about to be mayor. So again, like returning to this question of why is it the Democratic Party is not doing the things that many of his constituents believe is a matter of policy? Why is it not doing things that most Americans support when it comes to healthcare, environmental policy, gun policy? Why is it not actually doing the things it would take as a matter of political reform to achieve those things? I think it's because they have the wrong people in Democratic elected seats. And so the question is, how do you actually get more people on our side of things elected as Democrats? That's the question. That is the question. And I think that Zohran offers one way. And I think, again, if Bernie Sanders had a political approach that got him majority of Democratic primary voters in the races he ran, he'd be in a position, he might be president now. He would certainly be, in the very least, a position to change the party's disposition and outlook on a lot of different things, more so than he is as someone who lost the nomination. I just have more faith than I think you do that the internal politics of the Democratic Party are malleable and capable of being subject to pressure from left-wing voices. If those left-wing voices are creative.
No, you're misunderstanding. I'm describing how they could be pressured. I'm describing it.
But you're describing it because I think the idea that you win more power with Democratic primary voters by being more adversarial than Bernie Sanders was already about Democratic Party politics, I don't know that makes a whole lot of sense. I think frankly, Mamdani, for as much as people have criticized him for being accommodating on certain things that he said and so on, I think is shown, by contrast, that a different kind of political approach probably gets you the goods with the Democratic primary electorate and brings you closer to being elected.
To be clear, being adversarial doesn't mean being angry. You can be adversarial and have a smile on your face. You can be adversarial and talk to people. But the point of the matter is, if Zohran Mamdani hadn't doubled down on defending the globalized intifada, I do not think he would have had the outpouring of support. But for the fact that they tried to attack him over Palestine, and everybody ran to his defense, we would be in a very different place.
Sure.
And that was as adversarial as it gets. Saying you're going to arrest Netanyahu when he shows up in Manhattan. But you don't think
there are plenty of things that Sanders did in 2020, 2016 that were as committed to his principles and standing for what he already believed in without being accommodating? I think there are plenty of places that he was.
I think more so in 2016, and he fared better in 2016 because he clearly had some animus for Hillary Clinton. So in 2016, he was willing to say that she was corrupt.
Yeah.
He was willing to talk about her acts of corruption and, Wall Street speeches and bad votes, TPP, all of that stuff. He was willing to go there with her. She's a war criminal. Henry Kissinger is not my friend. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was willing to go there, and he was more successful electorally. There were other factors. Obviously, there were fewer candidates. A little, it's potato. It's it's apples and oranges at a certain point. But in 2020, no. In 2020, it felt like he was running on purpose this time. He anticipated being able to really do it this time. And there was a kind of cautiousness that came with the investment in wanting it to really work, as opposed to a sort of a cavalier, I never thought I'd get this far attitude that was more present in 2016. And I think that cautiousness, more so than anything, doomed him because he thought he could just put on a tie and assuage people's concerns, the bad faith concerns from the corporate media, and make his way through being the good guy.
Right.
And it didn't work.
Well, but he got pretty close, didn't he? I mean, he got closer in 2020 than he did in 2016. He was at the top of the polls at a certain point in 2020 for a while, right? I mean, I don't see 2020 as a kind of degradation of what happened in 2016. I think it was successful in a lot of key respects, actually. And I think it mattered too. I mean, so one of the most important facts about the 2020 primary that I bring up to everybody is that Morning Consult did this slate of polling where they asked people not only who they supported as their top choice, but who they supported as their second choice, right? The top choice, excuse me, the second choice of people who supported Joe Biden, so I think most of that primary was Bernie Sanders, and vice versa. The second choice of people who support Bernie Sanders was Joe Biden. I think partly it's a matter of name recognition, but the actual character of the primary was most voters saying to themselves, "Well, look, we don't actually even perceive necessarily the ideological differences between these candidates or
Yeah,
care about them that much. We
that's the
just want somebody who's
problem.
going to, well, yeah, but it's something you can address and you can tell your political
Right.
pitch
That's what I'm saying,
through,
Osita, that it was Bernie's responsibility to make those political contrasts clear, those
but the
substantive
people,
contrasts clear. And he was unwilling to do
my
so.
point is that people didn't care about them. Those contrasts were very,
I disagree.
people understood to a certain extent that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, they understood that there might have been differences between these candidates. Yes, people did not see Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden as a kind of one-to-one politically and weren't able to
I
perceive
think
contrast. They just didn't care about them. They didn't care.
I
They
think
they
that in
cared
March,
about winning the general election. And if Bernie
I
Sanders,
think that Bernie could have tried saying, I'm more likely to beat Trump than Biden. I
I
think
think he did.
that's exactly that. No, he did not.
He never
He did
said that.
not. He did. He said it sometimes. The point is that he did not make the electability argument central to his message. There was
No.
all of this hand wringing and panic about how to win the black vote without acknowledging that the black vote was primarily concerned with electability, and that instead of thinking you could do a fish fry with Al Sharpton or whatever the heck
Yeah.
to try to ingratiate yourself to somebody, if you want to win the black vote, you run ads with those morning consult polls or whatever they were on the screen showing in all of these head-to-head matchups between me and Donald Trump, I beat him by a wider margin than anyone else in the race. And by the way, same was true in 2016. The Democratic Party won't tell you the truth about electability because they're afraid that I'm going to get into office and go after the private healthcare industry and the military industrial
Yeah.
complex that is funding their campaigns. But I'm going to be here for you. And I'm the most electable. That messaging is not anywhere to be seen.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a trade-off here. I think that there is, look, people obviously respond very powerfully to somebody who seems like an outsider and a rebel. And I think Bernie Sanders, even if he wasn't as adversarial as he wanted to be, I think it was successful in conveying that message to people. People thought that Bernie Sanders cared about them. They might have agreed with him more on policy if they think that they knew about policy than Joe Biden and so on. But people like the idea of free healthcare notion and so on. There are ways in which Bernie Sanders made a very compelling case on that basis. People do not intrinsically believe in this country that somebody like that wins elections or could be the president, right? At least on the Democratic Party side. People want people who seem somewhat conventional um, and trust them to win more easily than people who are perceived as radical, even kind of aesthetically. And I think this is one of the strengths of Mamdani's campaign, actually. Because Mamdani, I think, people people who've observed his trajectory in New York City politics know that even his aesthetic presentation is very different from what it was 2, 3 years ago. He's made a conscious effort to present himself as somebody who can work as an ordinary kind of politician, very charismatic one, but somebody who is going to take those demands, take those ideas, and run a kind of ordinary campaign where he's out there and he looks kind of like a standard Democratic politician in many kind of respects. That's what I think has convinced a lot of people who would not ordinarily support his campaign or be skeptical about it to actually take the risk and jump on board and support him. People were not willing to
I
do the same for
disagree.
Bernie Sanders.
No, I disagree. I think that Zohran won the primary because we have ranked choice voting. Cuomo is uniquely
He
hated.
won in the first round, though.
Right, because people were willing to rank him because they didn't feel like there was any cost to putting Zohran first. There's no that's the beauty of ranked choice voting, and it's a boon for third-party progressive candidates as well. For that very reason, because there's a lot of naysayers on the left who will tell you a million reasons and one not to consider a non-Democratic Party candidate.
Right.
So yeah, I'm not trying to take anything away from Zohran's political talents, but let's not overstate the case here. As talented as he can be, if Cuomo's not in this race, and if there's not ranked choice voting, and if there's not, to David Sirota's point, also public funding, he's not on the map. So that's why I'm so like when I say when you say I have pessimism, it's not pessimism, but you have written an entire book about the structural obstacles to there being any real change, because we don't live in a democracy, so that our desires, our political preferences are not being reflected in our representatives. You wrote the book on it. I would be waving it around, but I did confess that I did the book on. I did. I've been listening to you for like 9 hours.
I'm so sorry. You should not have done that.
No, it was great. You did it. You read it very well. I listened to it, and if it had been one of those robotic reading voices, I would have just gone and bought the book. But you were doing it well, so I went ahead and committed to my Audible version.
Yeah.
But like that's what I'm saying. Like Zohran's win, I think, is more of a reflection of how important those structural changes are.
Sure.
You know, is it a coincidence that you get a Graham Plattner in Maine, another ranked choice voting state? I mean, I don't really know what's going on there, to be honest. I haven't been following it that closely. But,
right.
But you know, is it a coincidence or is it not? You tell me.
Right. No,
like,
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I think ranked choice voting is an important part of the story. I think you're right that it changes people's calculus about who they support and so on. But I don't think it's right to attribute everything that's happened purely to those kind of like outside structural factors.
No?
No. No, I don't.
Well,
Because first of all,
why not?
first of all, we're about to have a general election that is a normal general election where he is going to defeat Andrew Cuomo.
Yes. I mean, you know.
Purely as a function of an ordinary vote. It's not ranked choice. Andrew Cuomo, as wounded as he was, had a lot of institutional support, managed to bully a lot of institutions and organizations into supporting him. Still a very, very powerful politician. And I think it is to the credit of the Mamdani campaign that they found a political approach and ran a campaign that was capable of overcoming those things. And yes, the structural piece is an important part of this. My point is,
it's not just an important part. It is a but-for factor.
Sure.
That takes nothing away from the amazing campaign that was run. But a lot of people have run amazing campaigns, and they didn't have the benefit of the ranked choice voting, which induced Brad Lander to co-endorse and everyone else to collaborate.
Yeah.
That behavior would not have existed but for that. It had a legitimizing force as the senior most Jewish elected official in the wake of all of the bad faith attacks he was getting. There was a perfect storm, and Cuomo being like, remember, this was not that long ago. Let's not memory hole. Zohran's first pitch, his primary pitch was, don't rank Cuomo. Yes, free buses and all of that stuff was there. God bless. But the main thing that was coming across in my social media feed was don't rank Cuomo. And everybody could get on board with that message. Everyone who wasn't Cuomo was saying don't rank Cuomo. And so then it becomes a question of then who do you rank? And that's a different kind of conversation when we know that we can express our values, because no matter what, we know Cuomo's not going to win.
Right. But now he's in a position where people have expressed their values and they're now choosing who they would like to actually be the mayor.
Yeah, and that's amazing.
And he's I think on the strength again of what he's been able to put together as a campaign, he's probably going to win.
But also he's running against, again, I'm not trying to be funny, but he's running against Cuomo and Adams, previously.
Sure.
So again, if Adams were Bloomberg, I mean, even Bloomberg has, but if Adams were like not quite as scandal prone and ridiculous, certainly if he were, if he were de Blasio, I don't know that Zohran would even be running. But if he were just a regular guy, Scott Stringer before he kind of fell out of it all, I don't know that we were in this position. I think Scott Stringer pulls it out. People stick with what they know. Everyone writes off Zohran as some young upstart socialist who doesn't know what he's talking about. And we keep it pushing. Mm-hmm. And again, that is not to diminish Zohran, but like, I'm trying to take from that lesson, not to diminish Zohran, but to say, oh my God, what amazing structural realities that enabled the outcome that I wanted to come true. How do we get those in the rest of the country? How do we fight for those?
Yeah. Well, I think you need politicians who are willing to not just fight for them rhetorically, but actually enact them. And so the question is, how do you elect those people, which is the other half of this debate. What is the right political approach?
You know how much the Democratic Party is opposed to these reforms for exactly this reason. This is what we're getting back to. Yeah, it would be great. Democrats would always win if we had 2 more states. Democrats would always win,
Well,
or
I don't know
mostly
if they'd
win
always
if we.
win, but yeah.
But Democrats would overwhelmingly win if we got rid of the Electoral College. Democrats would not be so skewed. What's the statute that you talk about how Trump was able to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, and that's even worse when you consider that the number of people that actually elected Trump was like only 47% of the population, or maybe lower, as a consequence of the inequities of our system.
Yeah. I mean, look, we do not have the Democratic Party that you and I would want, right?
Yeah, but you don't need to.
Look,
we get that, but the question is, how do we get it? How do we get it? Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.